Welcome to Law Subscribed. This is your dedicated news source for all things subscriptions and the law. My name is Matthew Kurbis. I'm the subscription attorney, and I believe subscriptions can help bridge the access to justice gap and incentivize attorneys to modernize and scale their practice like never before. In this episode, I interview Maria Worley. Maria is the founding attorney of Start.law, which is both the name of the law firm and the URL. If that doesn't tell you right away that Maria is delivering legal services in an innovative way, then how about her approach to representing startup founders with a focus on social impact startups and underrepresented founders through affordable subscriptions? It was great talking with a like-minded attorney trying to provide valuable legal services efficiently at accessible prices. Thank you to my sponsors, 650 and Gavel. Links to both in the show notes, and more on them later. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and nothing said is legal, ethical, or financial advice. Without further delay, here's the episode. Maria, thank you so much for being on Law Subscribed. I'm so happy to have you here. I read about your law firm on myshingle.com and was so excited to discover it because I had just launched my own subscription practice and thought that there were only maybe a handful of us out there who have these subscription models for our law firms. And the other firms that I've discovered and researched, the other attorneys I've interviewed so far for this podcast, they do it in a very different way from the way I envisioned that I launched my firm. But what I saw with Start.law is so closer to what I had pictured for how to run a successful subscription practice. So again, it was just so exciting for me that I had to reach out right away. We were able to connect. You were able to help me out. And so I'm just so grateful that you're on the podcast. So, thank you for coming. And please introduce yourself to my listeners.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here. And I'm glad I was able to help you out. That's great. My name is Maria Worley. I've been an attorney since 2005 and launched Start.law in 2019. Like you said, it's a subscription service for emerging companies, for founders and startups.
And you had been practicing law for a little while when you launched. So what was that process that led you down the path of, I want to launch a subscription model with a law
Absolutely.
practice?
Yeah. So I kept seeing a barrier to people's businesses because they weren't getting the legal advice they needed, and they weren't seeking the legal advice because it was too expensive. And so people kept, relying on templates. And then I kept meeting all these clients who, thought that they had done everything right, but now they were in the, miserable situation of having to give up a lot of equity in their company because of something they had signed without legal advice, or losing some of their intellectual property even because they didn't have the right documents in place. So I thought about this for a long time, and I was just trying to come up with a way that, real legal advice could be affordable, could be somehow on par with the templates that people were going to. And so I did a lot like you. I looked to see who's doing subscription services and, tried to figure out, the best way to do it. And, it was a lot of trial and error. In the beginning, we changed what we included in those plans, I think, at least 5 times. But it's worked out really well. Clients, will email with an issue, and we can take care of it rather than it snowballing into this huge issue because they didn't want to, pick up the phone and be charged an hourly rate for, something. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest aha moments that attorneys will have who are using the subscription model, and even some of the impetus for why they started it in the first place is their inability to develop relationships with clients because the client is afraid that once they start talking to the attorney, the clock starts ticking.
Exactly.
Which is money to most attorneys' ears, but it prevents the clients from it shuts out a whole part of the market.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So since you've now been doing this for several years, What has that experience been like to be able to actually develop relationships with clients without them being afraid they're being billed for their time?
It's wonderful. I enjoy my practice so much more. And, not having to track time is a gift. Every day is happier. And, I mean, the client relationships, it's almost friendships, I mean, you're emailing frequently and they've developed over years now and it's wonderful. You're a member of your client's team more than like this outside person that gets checked in with, 2 or 3 times a year. So I think we've really been able to plan things out better, have long-term strategies that, everybody is just happier. I'm happier doing the work. The client's happier because they have affordable legal advice, and the businesses are doing better because all of the proper steps are being taken, rather on a daily basis or weekly or monthly basis, rather than those few check-ins a year.
Yeah, there's really, you've already said so much that we could go down so many different paths with this conversation. But I want to go back just briefly to the billing aspect of not having to track your time and the elation that you have, that you don't have to do that. Talk about, the efficiencies you've built so that you don't have to track your time, and some of the ancillary benefits. So, has your mental health improved? That kind of a thing.
Absolutely.
And like what that process was like of building that, and maybe even some of the technology that you're using to bill, and as opposed to just having a billing manager that has to hunt down clients or that kind of a thing.
Right. So we do a recurring subscription. So it just, once you sign up, obviously you can cancel at any time as per the rules, but it's just recurring monthly. So it's a flat set monthly fee, and any filing fee or anything like that is just charged at the time that we do the filing. And it's just taken this entire administrative piece out of the practice. It's automated with Stripe or whatever, I mean, it's just very simple. And as far as efficiencies, there was a lot of, I don't even know that I've fully gotten this up to where I'd like it to be, but it's basically creating a process for every type of legal issue that comes in, just to know how long it's going to take to do an incorporation, say, for example, how long is it going to take to do all of those documents and have it signed, and how are we going to store them, and how are we going to have them electronically signed, and I mean, all the stuff that you would normally do. But it caused me to go through every project in like way more task oriented, detailed way than I ever had previously, just to see, can we do this for the prices that we were setting, or, are we going to be working crazy hours to try to meet it, so.
Are there, so part of this is you've had many years of experience before you were able to launch a subscription practice. So is it, how much are you falling back on that experience to create these efficiencies and to plan out how you're going to do this? And how much of it is relying on, if you're using any legal tech for document automation, things like that?
Mm-hmm. A lot of it was all new and researching. And I feel like legal tech products come out like almost on a daily basis, it seems. So, I'm still doing it, and I'm still, trying to see what is out there for, there are hundreds of template services and, e-signature services. And, I've had some bad and some good experiences. I can't remember if I told you this when we talked last, that my last Christmas/New Year's was spent in a horrific time of it was a seed closing, and I won't say who they were, but the electronic signature on many documents just disappeared. It just, we opened the file up and it was gone. And I was in this situation of having to wait, the software development team was overseas, and, I'm waiting to see, are they going to be able to recover these signatures? And they were, about 8 hours later, but it was a terrifying 8 hours. Yeah, back to DocuSign. And we're not trying any more e-signature softwares that haven't been on the market for at least, 10 years.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of good tools out there. And I think, there's some even that are outside of like the legal, specialty, even just things like Calendly, like, just letting a client have a link to set an appointment rather than 6 phone calls back and forth. And, it's great.
Yeah. All right. So far, Stripe, DocuSign, Calendly. I'll see if I can get any of them to sponsor the show. And while we're going down that path, is there any other sort of tech, legal or not legal specific, that's worth mentioning? Because again, this audience the goal is, attorneys, to inspire them of how they can launch a subscription practice on their own, and technologists to develop for attorneys for that, for that end. So
Yeah.
anything else that you're using or you've used, and brand names are fine. Feel free to disparage or not disparage any companies.
Sounds good. Sounds good. I was just talking recently with the founder of something called Hey Counsel, and they are trying to do basically like for startups and founders a legal referral service, but that's based more deeply on things than like just a question, like I need a contract type thing. And so I was having this conversation with him a little bit because he was worried that the space is a bit crowded for that. And, he was like, what's your dream? If you could have, the best tool for this. And I think what it is, and, maybe it's out there and I just haven't found it yet, is in the same way you have an electronic record for, your doctor, that you can take that record to a different doctor. I would love it if there was something like that where, a lot of times founders come to me where they've got some documents from Clerky and they've got some from another law firm and they've got some that they just pulled off the internet. And, if there was like a software that had, this is my legal file for my business, and, here now I've invited you to see it, and it can go to, anywhere, and that would be my ideal tool. So if you've heard of it, please let me know.
Yeah, I've definitely heard of some contract management systems that, while they're not exactly what you're saying, I think they have the potential to do that.
Yeah.
And so insert advertisement here if I'm able to convince them to sponsor this episode for whichever one of them. And I'm going to reach out to their founders, and I know a lot of them.
Nice.
But yeah, I mean, there still needs to be buy-in, right, by the founders of a company, that they want to pay for whatever monthly fee that's going to cost, right?
Right, exactly.
Or but like what you're doing and what I'm trying to do, which is be a company, or even in my case, a person's outside in-house counsel. Fractionalized in-house counsel is another way to put it, I think. And so the idea would be, instead of having to hire like an attorney full time, right? If you're a company, but then my approach is, in addition to that offering, which I sort of have to offer as I start my business, is because I have clients that need that. But the way that I personally envisioned it was that for people, for like everyday people, and that's why some, like, your prices, and they may change. So I'm not going to necessarily say them on the podcast because you never know. But Start.law, what your basic price level, I have a tier at that level, but I also have a tier below that level at only $20 a month, because I'm targeting the market of people that previously couldn't afford legal counsel, and serving them as like a fractionalized in-house counsel for their life. So, and I see a massive market opportunity there for lawyers, in addition to massive need from the public.
Oh, absolutely.
And so that's sort of that's where I've really developed my business, but I sort of had to, because of my existing clients and needing to make a living.
Right.
I developed a model that surprisingly and we developed these models independently, and you've been operating for years,
Hmm.
but my model is similar to what you're offering.
Hmm.
And we haven't really gone into the nitty gritty of the details of my plan versus your plan, but you also have more of a niche practice than me, where I'm more of a general counsel, like a true general counsel. Like if a company
Yeah.
hired me, one of my additional services is I will manage your outside counsel for you.
Hmm.
And there's a monthly fee associated with that because I realize like you have the expertise of, venture capital.
Right.
I don't have that.
Right.
And so if I had a client who started a business that wasn't a high growth startup, which I don't really represent those types of startups,
Right.
and they wanted to become a high growth startup, now I could reach out to someone like you, and either you can take that case from me, which is a whole other conversation of how do referrals work with subscription
Right.
attorneys,
Right.
which it's never been done before as far as I'm aware.
Same here. Yeah.
And that's a whole other conversation that we'll definitely have to have off call. But I think that could be
Yeah.
interesting to have to come back and talk about that at a later time.
Hmm.
And or just if you just were just they still wanted to hire me but also hire you for their
Hmm.
specialized knowledge, then I would continue to serve as their sort of general counsel. And when they needed venture capital advice, they would use Start.law. And then
Hmm.
you and I would talk, and I would be talking on behalf of our shared client because I'm their sort of
Hmm.
outside general counsel. That's the
Hmm.
idea anyway.
Yeah. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think what you're doing is a bit more challenging because of so many practice areas, but I think it can be done, and I'm glad you're going for it,
Yeah. And go ahead.
it's a different approach, I think, that you're going to wind up taking or have taken, because like what I did was just a lot of trial and error, 500 corporations needed this, and how long does it take this, and it could be anything for you. It could be a car accident or a will or.
Well, this is why I'm so glad we're having this conversation, and we're doing it live on a recording, subject to edits and post, and and because I'm not doing any litigation work, and so that's the other side of
Yeah.
it
Okay.
is
Right.
I will be referring all litigation out because at least as a solo practitioner, unless I were doing high volume, then I think you could make subscription and flat fee work for high volume, such as insurance
Hmm.
defense related work, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, even for foreclosure on the prosecution side, I think you could make it work for subscription and flat fee billing.
Yeah.
But for just a solo practitioner just starting out, it's just transactional because that way I could automate a lot,
Hmm.
and just like I use a lot of the same tools you've already mentioned,
Yeah.
and then I'm able to be as efficient as possible on the transactional side of things. So
That makes a lot of sense. That's a
yeah.
good limitation.
And
Yeah.
then that makes me ask you to Start.law. Do you engage in litigation when necessary?
For an additional fee. So it's not as part of the subscription model. And all that's come up is a couple of small claims things, a website not, being charged back after it launched, things like that.
Any IP related litigation yet that you've had to do?
Not yet. Not yet.
Well, that's good. That means you're doing your job because another thing that I see the subscription model is good for is problem avoidance.
Hmm. Huge for problem avoidance. I mean, and I think that's why everybody's happier. You're not in this crisis mode. You're in this strategy mode, when you're talking to your clients mostly. It's not, oh God, we're being sued. I got this letter in the mail, yeah, it's just way more proactive, and you can avoid a lot of, it's more affordable for the client, I think, in the long term, because you're preventing these super expensive litigation matters, ideally.
Yeah. And so in addition to the subscriptions that are stated on your website, how do you handle it when things go beyond the packages that you offer?
Yeah. So we do a flat rate for seed raises, like just up to 1 million is one price, up to, for up to 2 million is another price. And we haven't gone farther than a Series A at this point, financing. And for, like the small claims matters that I mentioned, you know, I think there's only been a handful of them, but I think 9 out of 10 of them wound up representing themselves just with like a little back end support from us. But usually, there's somebody local that's willing to step up. I think I mentioned to you I had a friend in Atlanta from law school that handled one of these small claims things when it came up, just because, it's easy enough work to understand and wrap your head around and get taken care of.
Yeah, and so another thing I wanted to ask you about that I do have to backpedal a little bit because again you gave me so much good stuff up front is do you think that an attorney just starting out
Mm-hmm.
who doesn't have the amount of years of experience you did when you were ready to launch a subscription model, do you think that there's enough out there that they can just start a practice and be able to use a subscription model, and has it been efficient enough that you think that maybe if they listen to this podcast, if they
Yeah.
get some mentorship from like someone like you or someone like me, that they don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily need to follow the traditional path of this is how you practice law, and they don't need years and years of experience to do it. You think that's possible? And like, what would your advice be to a law student or a young lawyer who wants to pursue this?
I do. And I think it's actually really important. I think it's the way the future is going. But I'm so excited that you're doing this podcast because I would have killed for this resource in 2019, because it was a lot of just trying to piece things together and reading, ethics rules. And, you were way more proactive than I was, actually reaching out to a few attorneys who did it. I just looked at their websites and, sheepishly, creating mine and, oh, will this work? But I think, like we've discussed, there's, big business kind of creeping into the legal practice. And I think that as attorneys, we need to respond to what the market wants and, be a little bit realistic that yes, our expert knowledge is valuable, but, we also have to compete in this market that there are templates out there and, they're very attractive to someone bootstrapping a company or, someone that just doesn't have the money to throw at an hourly rate. So yeah, advice would definitely be to listen to your podcast and actually email any, practicing attorney that you find that has a subscription practice. And, I looked at other areas too. I looked, were any accountants doing this and, just, anything you can find. And I think as far as the process, it really is like, figuring out what your practice is going to be and then going through each process that you have. I mean, there'll always be atypical legal things that come up, but as much as you can, just automating everything that can be automated and having systems in place to kind of prepare.
When I went solo, I pivoted from mostly litigation to a transactional-only practice. I did not have a database of documents to automate. That's why a business and employment legal document database and automation tool like 650 is super useful. I can rely on the quality of the documents in 650's database since they're putting excellent legal minds to work curating and updating their documents and automations over time. When you're not billing by the hour, outsourcing and efficiency matters, and 650 can help you scale your practice to get high-quality documents drafted in less time. Use the code LAWSubscribed at 650.com and when being onboarded to get 10% off. If you're not a business and employment attorney, or you have your own documents that you'd prefer to use, then my next sponsor, Gavel, is the automation tool for you. Gavel allows you to build shareable, client-facing workflow and document automations. In other words, Gavel helps you create a legal practice where attorneys can monetize the value they bring clients in productized form at scale via subscriptions and flat fees. Use the code LAWSubscribed at gavel.io to get 10% off an annual subscription. There's no one right way to automate and scale your practice, but with one or both of my sponsors, 650 and Gavel, you can take your subscription law firm to the next level. Links to both in the show notes. Now back to the show.
I describe it a lot as insurance to, when I'm speaking to a prospective client. It's like, some weeks you may talk to me every day because you've got something going on, but then we might not talk for 2 or 3 months, but you know that somebody, knows your company, that somebody's there to email with a question, and, it that's my analogy.
Yeah. I think the insurance analogy is an apt one, but it's also not insurance, which is like a clear,
Right.
like distinction to be
Right.
made, because there is like legal shield, which is more of like legal
That's
insurance.
true.
And
That's true.
it's a very different product than what you and I are offering. It's not actually, legal advice. It's access to some attorneys at some times for a very, very limited scope. And then if your problem
Hmm.
becomes a larger issue, you hire that law firm directly, and they more often than not will bill you by the hour.
Right, exactly. And making that distinction clear is huge, I think.
Yeah, but in the same ways that people think of insurance, right? I get it in case I need it. There is a lot of overlap with that.
Yes,
Um, yeah, and it's our job to make sure our clients are using it so that they stay
right.
subscribed.
Exactly.
So we have incentive to continue to provide value if they're not reaching out to us.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, because eventually it would get canceled, and you know, and then everything goes smoothly, and we have a happy client for years and they don't have a big legal mess.
Right. And so, what are some of the things, Maria? Not to necessarily reveal all your secrets, but what are some of the examples of successes that you've had in that regard of keeping clients subscribed, and maybe some of the positive feedback that you've heard from them, anonymously?
Absolutely. Yeah. I always hear that it's so nice to like not be on a clock, and that there are no stupid questions, that it feels very comforting, I think, to have a relationship with someone who's advising you about aspects of your business, and so I think people are surprised also once they're signed up, like how much legal stuff was kind of just not getting done. And, they're just happy that they get reminders when, they have franchise taxes due, and they're happy that when they are presented with a non-disclosure agreement, they can send it over for a quick review. And when they're having a product manufactured, they can, be sure that they're going to own the formula for it. And, it's just all the little things that come up. I can't tell you how many times people have like had social media, usernames or passwords like taken by a disgruntled employee, just like all the little things that you don't think of that come up while you're launching a company. I think it's comforting to people to know that there's somewhere to turn with those, and it's one thing a founder can get off their plate. I mean, because you're a founder, right, of your law firm. Even though it's a law practice, it's you're juggling all of these things all the time. And so to be able to not spend till 3 a.m. researching how you can protect your IP, and just have it affordable and know you can let that piece go, I think is a real relief, and is value. The value of having the person and the relationship is almost as much value as that expert advice, I think.
Right? Then the founder, then the CEO, they could focus on their business and what they're good at.
Exactly.
Right? Which is what I hear from content marketers and like business development people for lawyers all the time. They're like, focus on
That's
practicing
right.
the law, focus on your thing. Let us handle your marketing.
That's
Help
right.
you with your business development, right? And so if we're able to give that advice to our clients, I guess we should also listen to it for website designers and
Right.
marketers and all that too, right? So
If they charge us a reasonable fee, I'll do that.
yeah, right. If they charge us a fair subscription, maybe we'll do
Exactly.
it, right?
And I
And
have seen that for some website like maintenance plans and stuff like that.
yeah, and we're the lawyers, so we know we need to make sure that we actually own the IP of the website that this designer's designing, right?
That's right.
So you've taken some really interesting approaches that I also want to talk about, and I'll just mention a couple of them, and then I'll let you sort of say whatever you'd like to about it. So Start.law is the firm name and the website. So when it comes to branding, very cool. I'd love to hear what inspired that. And then also sort of with branding in your website, not only your practice area niche, but also your values that you put on your website about, women founders and women of color founders, and choosing to target, that market. And at least I know you could represent any, founder, but
Right,
you
right.
put it out there like this.
Yeah.
This is who we want to make sure is getting affordable legal representation. What were some of the, your thought process, the design reasons, the personal reasons behind making those types of choices?
Sure. So I'll just big picture, it was such an education doing this and learning about branding and marketing. And, so if someone's graduating from law school looking into this, like, be prepared, man. They should have more business classes in law school because that, it was a whole nother thing trying to learn about all that as well. As far as branding, it started with, just an accessibility idea, but then experience after experience and maybe a little bit of anger mixed in with that led to more of the target market. As on my website, I think the numbers are there, but like, out of VC investment, women get like 2%. I mean, and it's been for years, and it's frustrating as a woman, and so it's a very organic marketing message. And it's been very helpful having such a targeted client base because, I think it's stuff I would be saying anyway. And so it's very easy to put it into a blog post. And it's blogs I'd be reading anyway as a professional woman, just for myself, so I think something about, your marketing being true to what you really want to put out there in the world. And I don't know, there's not really fully thought formed sentences there, but I guess there's a lot of work to be done in this area, and there's a lot of opportunity right now. Like, finally there are women investors, I mean, there just weren't 10 years ago, and there's been growth there. And I think that a lot of women have really been disadvantaged by not having legal advice. I mean, everyone is disadvantaged when you don't have legal advice, but the template market, has led to, underrepresented founders just using templates and then getting screwed. It's just sad, and there's got to be a better way, and we can't just accept that, some members of our society are going to be able to afford $400 for an attorney, $400 an hour, and others are going to rely on these templates that they get off the internet. Like, it's just not acceptable. There's a better way. So
Right. It's the equivalent of, and this is in my copy on my website, and you have your own version of it, which is the do-it-yourself thing, right?
yeah.
And the version I use is with like plumbing, right? It's like, yeah,
Uh-huh.
sure, you could go on YouTube and you could maybe fix a small problem under your sink, and then if you do something wrong, a pipe will burst or something will be a catastrophic failure, and then a plumber could charge whatever they want.
That's right.
And so for same thing for a lawyer, for a subscription attorney is, we are the affordable plumber in that analogy that could come over and
Mhm.
fix it so you don't have to worry about it and it's not too expensive and you have a plumber on call at any time to fix those pipes. The equivalent of of a legal leaky pipe, that's what you hire an attorney like us for.
Yes. Yeah. It's just really funny that exact analogy, it like crossed my mind because of, I was very proud of myself for replacing our garbage disposal once, and was talking to a plumber then. "Oh, did you turn off the power before you did that?" Oh, I didn't even think about that. No.
Going back to the talk that we had about your desire to represent these underrepresented founders and women, I think that our profession also faces sort of a similar reckoning, and that is that our profession was not made for women attorneys, especially attorneys of color, women attorneys of color, to succeed. It was built for attorneys that look like me, and so the ABA has come up with a lot of data on how the profession, even though more than 50% of law students are women now. Less than 20% at the top of these big giant law firms are women, and women of color especially.
Mhm.
You are just another example of how it is women, and it is women of color who are taking this model and adapting it to have their own successful practice in a profession that wasn't built for the traditional model for it to fit to make it work for a
Yeah.
woman. And so I'm one of maybe two other white guys that have started this model, but it's all
That's
otherwise
interesting.
it's attorneys of color, or it's women or women attorneys of color.
Huh.
And so I just love to get your perspective on, why you think that is. And, the profession shouldn't be that way, but the reality
Right.
is it is. So is this a way, like, is a subscription model an avenue to empower individual women attorneys and attorneys of color to just have a super sustainable and successful practice?
Hmm. I didn't know that, but it makes a lot of sense to me because I think that one, like, as a woman, we see these problems. Like one of my motivations for doing this was I saw so many great ideas that weren't being developed because, you know, people of color or women were, relying on these templates and then having bad outcomes and, just losing their companies. So it makes sense to me that, like, people that were experiencing these things are the ones that are trying to create a solution. And yes, like within our law practice, you know, it's lovely. I have certain hours I do calls every day, and then I usually stop at around 3 and hang out with my kids until they go to bed and then work later at night. And it's not like you couldn't do that at a big firm these days, maybe, but I think it's a very nice life work balance because you're I guess we're setting new rules, and some of them that we've set are working remotely. That wasn't even really an established thing until the past few years. I think there were a lot of opinions. I remember I'm licensed in New York, and it was like, well, if I live in New Jersey, but I'm licensed in New York, can I work in my house? And I mean, it's just so ridiculous. Like, of course you should be able to do that. And as a mother and things like that, I mean, there just has to be space for women to contribute their thought and their work and still be able to nurse the baby. And it's just, we lose as a society, I feel, if we don't have adapt adaptations for things like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a great take on it, and I'm glad you could talk on it, because what do you need another man's perspective for on that? Though
Aw.
I recognize the problem, and you've heard it from men a million times. Well, I have a wife and I have a daughter, and that's true. But I'm still a man, and so to get the woman's perspective is much appreciated on that, because I see it as a big problem too, and I really do think this model could help with that. So,
Yeah.
one last substantive questions I have for you, and that is something on that you just said. I know we're running short on time here. So the jurisdictional issue that you just
Mm,
sort of mentioned, how do you handle that as a law firm? And
yeah.
what are you doing about that?
So we have, and I think I told you this too, I was very careful with this language. I, copied DLA Piper's, to a T because, when you read the rules, it seems like there should not be any national practice of law. I mean, but we have independent contractors in all 50 states, and we have relationship firms in some states. And it's basically just law firms that have agreed to follow our subscription rates. And also, I think the mission behind it, it's sort of tied into the last question. Most of the people that work with us are parents, are, women, are, it it's almost, some people have their own practices doing other things, and then this is a little side gig that, they do when we have work in Alabama, and it's been working out really well. And I think a lot of that is because of people seeing the need to put something like us out there into the world. And we haven't had any problems finding people, which I'm very thankful for, because, everybody else I know is struggling to find work, but it's a really nice thing to be able to, compare it to the big firm hours and lifestyle and say, or you could just work from home and, make our country a better place while you're at it.
Right, right. Here, here. Well, we're not going to get any better than that. So let's. I'll give you my final question here, which is just a for fun question, and that is, Maria, is a hot dog a sandwich?
Ooh, I like that. I'm very into sandwiches. I'm going to go with yes,
Why?
because my kids the other day were asking that about a burrito, like a tortilla. And it was wisdom from one of them. I can't remember who was the 12-year-old or the 3-year-old, but one of them was like, well, no, it's just like a sandwich, it's just the same thing. So you've got your flour-based wrapping, and then you've got your filling. So I think that's my sandwich definition.
Okay, and I'll cut you a break for our gluten-free listeners, where a flour or flour substitute wrapping.
There you go. Perfect.
All right. Well, Maria, it was a pleasure to have you on the show. Obviously, if there's any clients listening or if interested attorneys want to see your model, Start.law, that's what you type into the web browser. Is there any other way that you want listeners to be able to reach out to you?
Feel free, if you are an attorney and looking to start a subscription law firm, feel free to contact me and listen to Matthew's podcast, because there are people on here besides me offering a lot of gems. And yeah, that's it. Thank you, Matthew.
All right, great. And LinkedIn, that's where we reached out. Is that LinkedIn, a good place?
LinkedIn, yes. And feel free to email me too, Maria@Start.law. Easy one to remember.
All right, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks again to 650 and Gavel for sponsoring this show. The best way for others to discover this show is for you to share it with someone you think would find a value from it. Follow me on LinkedIn, since that's where I'm most active on social media, and click the bell towards the top right of my profile to get notified about all of my posts about this podcast and everything else I think is valuable for you to see. To get in touch, message me on LinkedIn or email Kurbis@lawsubscribed.com. All links are in the show notes. Until next time, this is Matthew Kurbis with Law Subscribed.